A human life was put in danger, all because of Ho Karen's arrogance. We can't let this slide anymore. What happened? What did Ho Karen do? How will she pay the price? Stay tuned and leave a comment below about how you feel. Afternoons in our Willow Creek neighborhood are usually very peaceful. The cheerful chirping of birds echoes from the lush, towering trees, blending with the gentle trickling of water from the elegant fountains lining both sides of the walkway. The perfectly paved stone roads, reflecting the soft glow of the setting sun, lead to magnificent mansions with sophisticated architecture, surrounded by immaculately trimmed green lawns maintained under the strict regulations of the Homeowners Association, HO. It's a tranquil atmosphere where every sound seems to be part of a serene symphony. But today, that peaceful scene was abruptly shattered by the blaring sirens of an emergency vehicle. The piercing sound cut through the clear sky, reverberating throughout the neighborhood, making us instinctively glance out our windows. The ambulance sped down the stone-paved road, its tires screeching against the surface as it prepared to stop in front of an elegant, pale blue mansion. Smoke billowed from the engine, dissipating into the air. Inside, paramedics in emergency uniforms, emblazoned with a bold red cross, were in a rush. Their eyes reflected urgency. Every second that passed could mean the difference between life and death for the patient waiting inside. Stop right there. You are not allowed in here. A sharp, commanding voice rang out, and out of nowhere, a woman stormed forward, blocking the ambulance. The tires screeched against the ground, slicing through the already tense atmosphere. Karen, the president of Willow Creek's Hoe, stepped into the scene with perfect golden curls bouncing with each determined stride. Her bright red blazer hugged her frame, while her high heels clicked against the stone pavement, each step radiating authority. Her plump face was flushed with anger. She crossed her arms, chin tilted up, her sharp gaze scanning the ambulance as if it were an unacceptable stain on her pristine neighborhood. I can't believe this. Do you think this is some kind of public street? This is whole private property, and we have very strict rules. You have no right to be here, especially not in front of my house. Ryan, the paramedic, remained calm, though frustration was evident on his face. Mom, we're responding to a medical emergency. A critically ill patient needs immediate care. Please cooperate. Karen scoffed, folding her arms tighter, her eyes flashing with disdain. I don't care. If I let you break the rules, tomorrow someone else will do the same, and then another, parking wherever they please. Karen jabbed a finger toward Ryan. Can you imagine what would happen if everyone did that? Where's the order? That's why the hoe exists, to prevent this kind of chaos. Ryan clenched his jaw, struggling to remain composed. Mom, every second counts right now. If we don't get inside, the patient's life could be in danger. Surely you don't want that to happen, do you? Karen placed her hands on her hips and rolled her eyes. Listen, young man, I voted for this rule, and am not about to break it just because of one exception. If you don't move your vehicle immediately, I'll call the police. And trust me, they'll be on my side. Inside the mansion, Walter Harris, an elderly veteran, lay motionless on the floor, his breath weak. His wife, Linda, her eyes red and swollen, couldn't stop her tears as she gazed out the window. Her voice trembled with sorrow as she choked back sobs. Are they still not coming in? He, he can't wait any longer. Panic-stricken, she turned and rushed toward the door, but her frail legs could not hold her steady. She collapsed at the threshold of the living room, grasping onto the armrest of a nearby chair, struggling to drag herself toward the front door. Karen's loud shouting forced us to gather, and murmurs of discontent began to grow. Some people were all too familiar with Karen's unreasonable behavior, but this time they could no longer endure it. Lisa, A longtime resident crossed her arms, her eyes burning with fury. It's her again. Just the other day, she sent me a warning letter just because I planted flowers that didn't match the HOA-approved colors. Does she really think she has the right to control everything? Another voice cut in as Jake stepped forward, visibly furious. And now she dares to block the rescue vehicle? Someone will die if this keeps up. We can't let this continue. I agreed wholeheartedly. It was pure madness that she insisted on enforcing her ridiculous rules. Stepping closer to her, I spoke as earnestly as I could. Please, let them through, Thompson. Mr. Walter can't hold on much longer. The neighbors around us nodded in agreement. Karen's arrogance was putting a man's life at risk. Don't act like you can change my decision, Mike. Karen nearly screamed in my face, even though I was merely trying to talk some sense into her. I had no desire to argue further. Every wasted second only made things worse. Pulling out my phone, I called the police. We had finally decided that it was time to use the law to make Karen understand that her absurd whole regulations meant nothing in a real emergency. Outrage spread, and the murmurs grew louder. People started moving closer, their eyes filled with determination and anger as they stared at Karen. No one could tolerate her unreasonable tyranny any longer. Yet, her absurd stubbornness remained unshaken. Fortunately, within moments, the distant wail of sirens broke through the tense atmosphere, growing louder by the second, signaling the arrival of law enforcement. The crowd of residents murmured amongst themselves. Some sighed in relief, some clasped their hands in silent prayer for Walter, while others stood with their arms crossed, waiting to see how the situation would unfold. The patrol car pulled up beside the rescue vehicle, and from it emerged two police officers in crisp uniforms. Officer Miller, a middle-aged man with a stern expression, stepped forward toward Karen, his demeanor calm yet resolute. "What's going on here?" he asked, his gaze flicking toward the waiting rescue vehicle. Karen immediately stepped up, her voice dripping with authority and self-importance. "I am the president of the Willow Creek Ho. This rescue vehicle has trespassed on our private road, violating Ho regulations. I ordered them to leave, but they refused to comply. I want you to remove them immediately." "Sir, I was the one who called you. She's been blocking the ambulance without any regard for the dying man inside." I stood up and spoke directly to the officers. Officer Miller narrowed his eyes at Karen before turning toward Ryan, the paramedic, who remained patiently waiting. "Can you explain this situation?" Ryan took a deep breath and said, "We are carrying out an emergency rescue mission for a critically ill patient inside this house. However, he nodded towards Karen, has blocked us and refused to allow the ambulance to stop." Officer Miller slowly nodded, his sharp gaze shifting toward Karen. "Ms. Karen, do you realize that obstructing an ambulance during an emergency is against the law?" Karen's face turned pale, but she still tried to stand her ground. "But this area has rules. If I let this happen, the order in the neighborhood will be disrupted." A mocking laugh erupted from the crowd. Mike, standing behind the officer, leaned forward and shouted, "Karen, you're stopping a rescue operation over some ridiculous rule. Do you even have a heart?" Officer Miller crossed his arms, his voice turning stern. "Ms. Karen, I need you to step back immediately so the ambulance can proceed with its mission. If you continue to interfere, I will be forced to issue a citation for obstructing public officials in the line of duty." Karen opened her mouth to protest, but upon seeing the officer's firm expression, she hesitated, then reluctantly stepped back. Immediately, the paramedics seized the opportunity. They quickly pushed the stretcher into the house, where Mrs. Linda was waiting, her face streaked with tears of worry. The crowd erupted into applause. We breathed a sigh of relief, but our gazes remained filled with anger toward Karen. Karen stood there, her face rigid, her fists clenched tightly. She had never been so publicly humiliated before. But it wasn't over yet. As soon as the ambulance left, the crowd was starting to disperse when a man's urgent voice stopped us in our tracks. It was Peter Harris, the son of Mr. Walter. "Dad, Dad." His voice cut through the murmuring of the neighborhood like a blade. Karen's eyes widened as she stared at him. The Walter family had only recently moved in, and until now, we had only met the elderly couple. This was the first time Karen, and the rest of us, had seen their son. But something about him felt strangely familiar. He stepped out of a sleek black car and hurried toward Mr. Walter's house. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored black suit, exuding an air of success. He appeared to be in his early 40s, and there was an undeniable aura of authority about him. A deep sense of unease welled up inside Karen. But no matter how uneasy she felt, Karen could never have anticipated what was about to happen next. The murmurs in the crowd faded into silence before erupting again, this time focused entirely on Peter. There was something oddly familiar about him. I felt like I had seen him somewhere before. Curious, I pulled out my phone, snapped a picture of Peter, and ran it through a search engine. The result made me gasp aloud. "Hey, that's the mayor." I held out my phone for everyone to see. It was a complete shock. The news website displayed a headline about the city's newly appointed mayor, titled "The Youngest Mayor in History," with a clear image of Peter Harris. His name was boldly printed beneath the photo. No doubt about it, he was the mayor who had been in office for just over a month. The revelation left everyone astonished, yet secretly delighted. They were eager to see Karen's reaction. Karen was completely frozen. Her plump face sagged, turning ashen gray. She stood motionless, unable to process what was happening, until Peter finally stepped right in front of her. His expression was cold, as if he was struggling to remain composed. "Mom, are you the whole president here?" "Yes," Karen answered. "I want to ask you, why did you prevent the rescue team from entering my house? What grudge do you have against my father?" Peter's eyes turned red, a mixture of worry and anger radiating from his gaze. "I was just following the whole rules. Mr. Walter is also a member of the whole. He will understand that." Karen stammered, but she still maintained her usual arrogant demeanor. Even now, she's still making excuses. Annoyed murmurs spread throughout the neighborhood. Peter clenched his fists tightly. I knew how hard he was trying to stay calm. As an outsider, even I couldn't accept this. I saw Peter step outside to make a phone call. Moments later, he returned to the house to comfort his mother, completely ignoring Karen. The very next morning, news of last night's incident had spread all over Willow Creek. Somehow, social media was flooded with videos showing Karen stubbornly blocking the tow truck, her authoritative yet irrational tone enraging everyone. I scrolled through the overwhelming number of mocking and critical comments. Blocking an emergency rescue. Classic "Oh Karen." She cares more about rules than human lives. Willow Creek doesn't need someone like her. I couldn't disagree. I was beyond fed up with Karen's authoritarian rule. This was probably the last straw. An emergency HOA meeting was held that afternoon. The HOA vice president, Mr. Carter, stood in the packed hall, his voice calm yet firm. "We cannot let the HOA become a tool for unreasonable control anymore. Karen has crossed the line, not only by blocking the tow truck, but also by endangering a critically ill person. I propose a vote to remove her from the position of president." A wave of applause erupted in agreement. A ballot was distributed, and one by one, the residents cast their votes. As expected, the final result was a unanimous 100% agreement. Karen was immediately dismissed. Karen, her face pale, stood in the middle of the crowd. She tried to maintain a tough exterior, but everyone could see the nervous tremble in her eyes. Her voice was choked with emotion. "You will regret this. I made this neighborhood perfect. No disorder, no chaos." I chuckled. "No, Karen. You turned this place into a prison. Rules mean nothing when they suffocate us and even put lives in danger. Now that prison is finally being torn down." Karen pressed her lips together, struggling to suppress her anger, then hurriedly left the meeting room. No one paid her any attention. After the meeting, I saw Karen's family packing their belongings. She had decided to leave the neighborhood. I couldn't help but feel a wave of satisfaction. Honestly, we had endured her tyranny long enough. Once Karen left, Willow Creek felt as if it had awakened from a long nightmare. Peter, in his capacity as mayor, sent an official notice instructing the neighborhood to elect a new HOA president. The notice also required the new president to abolish all unreasonable regulations that had negatively impacted residents. We were free. Laughter and cheer filled the neighborhood. From that day forward, Willow Creek was no longer just a beautiful residential area. It became a true community, a place where people cared for and protected one another, rather than being controlled by an authoritarian Ho Karen. Sometime later, I was driving through another neighborhood on my way to visit a friend. Stopping at a red light, I heard the rhythmic hum of a lawnmower. Curious, I turned to look at the lawn beside the road, and almost laughed out loud when I saw the woman bent over, pushing the mower under the scorching sun. Karen. She was dressed in a faded green work uniform, her once glorious blonde hair now tied back in a messy bun. Her face, which used to be meticulously made up, was now sweaty and flushed with frustration as she adjusted the mower blades. No more bright red blazers, no more high heels clicking arrogantly on stone pavement. She was now mowing lawns for a living. A cruel irony. The very woman who once forced all of Willow Creek to maintain perfectly manicured lawns was now working as a lawn care laborer for others. I stood still for a moment, watching Karen from a distance. A woman stepped out of a house, glanced at the yard, and said coldly, "Are you not done yet? Make sure you cut it evenly. Don't be sloppy." Karen pursed her lips, her face reddening with anger, but she couldn't argue. No more power, no more authority. She could only lower her head and continue working. I shook my head, smirked, and drove away. A part of me felt that Karen deserved this ending. But another thought. Maybe this was the lesson she needed. Stripped of her power, she was finally experiencing what it was like to be on the receiving end of unreasonable control. And so, the one who once imposed absurd rules on others had now become the one being ordered around. A perfect circle of justice. I pressed the gas pedal, leaving Karen behind, a distant memory of the oppression that I and the other residents had once endured.